Hello there, and welcome to this episode of Mindset Mentoring for Athletes, Families, and Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Coach Chuck. This show exists to explore what truly shapes performance, resilience, and well being, not just in competition or business, but in everyday life. Each conversation is designed to challenge surface level thinking and get to the deeper patterns that influence how we feel, lead, relate, and respond under pressure. Today's episode continues that mission by looking at mindset not as motivation, but as a skill that can be trained, regulated, and aligned, especially in seasons of stress, uncertainty, and transition. So stay tuned for the upcoming conversation. Parents today are carrying a weight that most generations never even had to name. Anxiety is rising, depression is rising, and teen suicide is now one of the leading causes of death amongst young people. And here's what rarely gets said out loud. Parents, you struggle too. You're trying to lead your family in a world that's changed faster than anyone prepares you for, and you love your kids deeply, yet sometimes wonder if what worked for you is enough for them. I'm Coach Chuck Barnhart, and I spent nearly 40 years as an educator and mindset mentor, and I've watched this shift up close. I've also lived it as a father of 4 children. My son Billy and I are launching a family mentorship because transformation doesn't happen in isolation. Teens don't need fixing. Families need leadership, language, and tools that bring them back together. This mentorship is designed for parents and teens walking the journey together, guided by experience, faith, and practical mindset training. And if you're part of the senior generation, a grandparent, a mentor, coach, or trusted voice, I want to ask something of you. Please consider sharing this with the families you know. Sometimes the invitation carries more weight when it comes from someone they trust. And somewhere out there is a family that needs to hear the message. This isn't for everyone, but for the right families, it changes everything. You can learn more by going to thechampionsmindsetmentorship.com. Welcome back. Today's guest is Kym Coco, author, yogi, educator, and founder of Swagtail. Kym holds a master's degree in sports kinesiology and has completed 2 500-hour yoga teacher training programs. She taught at California State University, Chico, and spent years leading workshops around the country, blending movement, mindfulness, and nervous system awareness in practical, accessible ways. Her life and work have been shaped by profound personal experience, including caregiving for her late husband through trauma, recovery, and the final years of his life. From that journey, Kym developed a deep understanding of presence, attention, and the mind-body connection, not as theory, but as survival, healing, and love in action. She is the author of Miracle on the Mountainside and the voice behind Swagtail, where she shares tools for grounding, resilience, and well-being rooted in nature, neuroscience, and lived experience. It is an honor to welcome Kym Coco to the show.
Hi,
Welcome.
Chuck. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I am really kind of looking forward to kind of getting into this conversation. We both have lost a spouse, so I can understand all that that entails, and we seem to have a shared interest in everything mindset. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Typically, I'd love to just have you introduce to begin with yourself to my audience. So just kind of, a little bit about your background, maybe where you grew up, education, things like that, and then we can kind of get into the real heart of the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for having me today. And I hail from Redondo Beach, California, Southern California, and it was a beautiful place to grow up with access to sports and sports teams and a very passionate and thriving culture. And it wasn't until I left Southern California and realized how much of an appreciation I had for the mountains It was such a gift to be able to explore the Tahoe area. And while I was going to California State University, Chico, I would spend the weekends teaching snowboarding lessons since that was something I had done growing up on occasion for years up at Mammoth Mountain. And so, from this background of soccer and softball and surfing and snowboarding, I had this really deep love for human movement. And it wasn't really until college and my study of this movement that I realized there were so many other layers behind the physicality of performance. I also want to throw in there, I find it very humorous that in my undergraduate, I failed English twice, and yet I've written 3 books and love writing. So I'd like to toss out there to you as the listener that just because something doesn't seem to be a fit the first time around, you can keep going. If it's passionate for you and you like doing it, there are ways to improve and find avenues to bring that passion to life.
I wholeheartedly agree with all that. That's wonderful. And the athletic aspect and the physicality is another thing that we kind of share in common. And, in the years I've worked with students, one of the quickest ways, probably the quickest way to begin to get them changed out of a negative state if they were in it, was to get them to change their body language, right? Their posture, get them to move, stand up, change their breathing. It's quick, it can be incredibly effective. So that's obviously something that I think we'll probably delve into a little bit more. I'm also curious because you have said, and again, working with teenagers, I saw this a lot, but that the mind wanders like 50% of the time, right? But the importance of being present in the moment, but yet we are constantly going back in the past or maybe out in the future. Can you talk a little bit more about that aspect of trying to be in the present and the importance of that and how you do that? Like again, I think about some of the teenagers I had and even myself, how challenging that can be sometimes to be in the present.
There was a lot there. So let's maybe
Yeah,
unpack that a little bit at a time.
yeah,
The first, I think, is this really great gift we have of focus, right? We have so much data swimming all around of us, and we can take this focus and pinpoint what we want to look at, what we want to pay attention to, and we can shine that light brighter so that the things around us become dimmer. So that's a really great asset we have. And we want to utilize that in the best ways possible. And there are tools to do that. We'll talk about some of those today, I'm sure. And yet, this mind wandering that you're talking about is also a survival mechanism. It's this way we can go out. If you look at our ancestors, maybe foraging in the forest, you could sort out which berries you want to eat and which ones you want to leave alone. And there's that wandering of, oh, I hear a sound. Is that something that's going to eat me coming out of the bushes? Is there a way for me to find a better place to search for food? So, this idea of us using our mind to zoom out and also appreciate maybe the past or the future, the surrounding environment, as well as that fine tuned point of focus, it's all beneficial. And I think that ability to know it's happening, that awareness of being aware, is something we're looking at enhancing, that meta awareness. And yet to say, okay, I know that my mind is wandering, it's going to the past, it might help me learn something from what I've experienced. I'm going to the future, I want to make a plan, I want to move forward on purpose. These are all really good things. So we don't necessarily want to squelch that. We want to be aware of when that mind wandering is taking us away from, say, the task at hand. When that happens, our performance decreases, our stress levels go up, our mood often suffers because we're making mistakes. We're not able to be right there with the person or the task in front of us. So, being aware of the quality of those thoughts when they're leaving the moment is helpful. Again, if there's a continuous cycle of a thought, maybe that's something we want to pay attention to and revisit later. Now might not be the time, so you make a sticky note and or make a note in your phone and set it back aside so you can stay present with what's happening. And this idea that, again, accepting spontaneous thought is a good thing. There's just that spectrum. It can be energizing and engaging for our creativity. And yet, when it starts to become that chatter, that negative cycle, then we say, okay, we're going to want to break that. And there are various ways to do that. I also think one of the best ways to stay focused is to take a step back entirely many times in the day and say, this is like letting your dog run free at the park instead of walking your dog on a leash. If your mind is constantly engaged in something, it's going to want to distract as a way to conserve energy. So, actually, building in chunks of time where we can let the mind go free. Again, noticing the quality of those thoughts is helpful, but just giving it that space can allow us to focus even better when it's necessary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And you know, we kind of come back a little bit because again, working with athletes a lot, it's so important to try to get them just so focused in that kind of flow state, right? That the zone, and the zone really is kind of in that moment, and that's where they need to be. But even outside of that, I think of the basic communication and being present in that moment when you're trying to communicate with somebody is so important. And some of the challenges I know people have, but some of the students I've worked with, is that, trying to tend to that conversation, that moment. So how do you go about helping train somebody? Because I agree wholeheartedly with you that it is trainable. It is something that I I I don't think we do a good job training people how to do. So kind of talk about what some of your thoughts are on that whole process.
That's a great question. So let's again break this down a little bit as well.
Sure.
There are multiple factors I think that play into something like this. And you've touched on it a lot already, actually, Chuck, by saying, let's get in the body. Let's get out of the head and let's get in the body. You talked about movement. We talk about breathing because if there's a stressful situation, let's say you're in a sport and the challenge is higher than your skill set, that's stressful. That's not flow, where our skill set matches the challenge at hand, or it's just high enough where we can rise to the occasion. So when there's stress, our breathing patterns change. It gets tight and we get tense. So we can practice off the field or off the court before performance to say, okay, how am I breathing more frequently? Where am I noticing tension in the body? So just increasing overall body awareness is, I think, one of the best tools to start to understand how we manage and regulate our emotional state. So that's one element.
And no, towards the end of my career, as I began to, uh, and when I say my career, I worked for years in public education, right? And I was always working with kids who were outliers, who really struggled in school, stress, anxiety, a lot of self-doubt, all these things. So, I ultimately, if I'm going to be successful in helping them academic, socially, emotionally, I got to work on their mindset, which are the beliefs and all that. But it also had a lot to do with their body, right? And changing state and managing this state. And towards the end of my career, I started implementing just the very beginning of class some box breathing. And it kind of, got a little bit of a joke going with my, oh, Mr. Barnard, do we have to do that again? Yes, we have to do that again. But they weren't really saying it as like we don't want to. It they actually liked those moments. Now, some of them weren't necessarily really doing the breathing as I wanted them to, but just the quiet moment where we were just there, it had a profound impact. I mean, I wish I had data that really kind of measure it. I didn't ever set anything like that up, but it had a definite impact on the climate and culture of the classroom.
I think that's wonderful, especially in today's culture where the pause is underappreciated. That space is underappreciated. The ability to be on your phone, to be connected, to be learning, to be engaged all of the time, it really can detract, I think, overall from that ability to be present. So the gift you gave them of just even space to be in their own head, to be there breathing, to just have something quiet, that's a really big skill to turn off off that need to connect. And I think that's where we can have those brilliant flashes of insight, those moments of inspiration. Wow, that idea of how I could be better and maybe the plan I want to take forward. But if we're always engaged, not even just with the head, but even with the body, then sometimes those those nuggets get overlooked. So I think
Yeah.
that's really great.
Now, you did just bring up phones, right? So I got to bring that up because I think the data is becoming more and more clear with this. Well, all of us. I know it as an adult, never mind younger kids whose minds are so malleable still at that time, but that constant scrolling and the constant 24/7 of social comparison and all of these things. You want to talk about what your beliefs are around social media and phones and the importance of separating that, or how do we in this modern age get a control over that? You know, as in the business I'm in with coaching and all, it that phone is like a lifeblood to a lot of what I do, and I don't like that necessarily. It's become a fact of just the way it is. So trying to respect that and understand that and put it in its proper place, I think is important. You want to speak to that at all?
I just had a really funny thought. I'm thinking of, say, a baseball player. When they step up to bat, the bat is a really wonderful tool to help them knock it out of the park. It's essential to be successful in the sport, in the game, in the moment. And yet, you wouldn't just carry the bat around to the grocery store or your bedroom at night. It doesn't go with you everywhere. And yet, it's establishing a relationship with something that's important to us. And that, I think, relationship evolves. And so, if we can start to understand maybe the phone as something that can benefit us, and we can start to build the awareness of how we are relating to that thing and how that is maybe a third party in our relationships when it shows up at the table. I think I actually heard a gal from, oh, where was she? She was from the Midwest, and she was speaking on the data of our focus when a cell phone is on the table. We're not paying attention because we are aware of something else in that space with us. So maybe just little nuggets of saying, okay, I'm going to take my phone, and when I'm having coffee with a friend, there are times I just put it completely away. Or I set a notification, hey, I'm blocking off this chunk of time. I've got homework to do. I'm actually playing my sport. You don't take your phone out on the field when you're playing. There are times where we separate ourselves from these things that really do help us connect in at other times. So if I was to come back to this idea that it helps us to understand that it's a tool, it's a resource, and we have a relationship to it, we want to get clear of how we want to be in relationship with that thing and how that thing might affect other relationships we have. And then I also want to say that creating the clarity and the space to be apart from it, just like we're apart from other people in our life that matter, or tools in our life that matter, resources that we use, and also then becoming aware of when we feel anxious apart from it, because there's a sign that maybe there's an imbalance in the relationship. I don't know about you, but if you have a friend that's around you all the time, or a spouse around you all the time, or any person in your space all the time, you're going to want to breathe. And so really starting to say, okay, what emotions are coming up? What sensations in my body are coming up? And that goes back to that tool of awareness that we can cultivate broad spectrum to say, okay, how is my physiology, how is my breath, how is my emotional state right now in relation to, say, your phone. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think as we start to develop these tools and really have a clear intention of why we're using it and when we're using it, that can help us keep it in balance so it does help us and not hurt us.
No, and you know, awareness, I think you use that word in that response, is so important. And, a lot of the work I do with people, that's one of the first steps in the process is becoming aware of the things, whether it's directly mindset related things like the labels you accept or how you're storing things physically in your body or habits that you aren't even really consciously aware of. You just do them, and until somebody points out that you're doing that, you're like, oh, do I really do that regularly? Awareness is always such an important part of that whole process. Um,
Can
yeah,
I interject something here?
please do.
I think once you have the awareness, then you're empowered to make a decision versus feeling like something controls you. So let's say you've put your phone away and you notice your friend hasn't. Maybe you say, "Hey, do you mind setting your phone aside while we spend time together?" And that's just taking it a step further to say, now I have the awareness. Now I'm making a different choice and I'm choosing to be here with you fully. And that's something we can use our communication. We can use other tools in our toolbox to also enhance our level of presence and create that sense of balance overall, I think.
Uh, the setting the example is a good, powerful thing. I talk about the importance in creating rituals in your life, and one of the ways to do that is empowerment teams, right? So the acronym I use a lot, and when I have my planting possibility keynote and all, is sower, a sower of seed of possibility. And the E in that is that idea of empowerment teams, because you know we've probably all of us have probably had that experience of like a New Year's resolution. Oh, we said it, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and it never comes to fruition. But we never really put together a team of people who are going to do this with us, to push us through, to help us. And, you know, in the creation of what I call the two most essential rituals we can have, a morning and an evening ritual, because we already have habits. We, I mean, we do certain things every morning, we do certain things every evening, but there's been no plan and no purpose behind those. So if we want to create a ritual which is more purposeful and tied into the identity of who we want to become, then we really need an empowerment team. And this I'm going to get to the question here, but part of what I think is real important with those rituals is the purpose of them is it's about preparing the mind, body, and spirit for the day ahead in the morning, or rest, recovery, and personal growth in the evening. So we have those three facets of ourselves. So you should have something that does each of those. And I think there are things like breathing practice, simple yoga, exercise, and all that bridge those those three elements. They can bridge the mind, certainly the spiritual aspect, and the body. So as somebody who's got all those hours of yoga training and have led people and all that, can you talk about the importance of that? And to me, it doesn't necessarily have to be yoga. I think yoga is fantastic for lots of reasons. But I know some people who swear by Tai Chi, which has some similar, types of things. But um, if you want to talk for a minute about the importance of yoga or body movement and its connection to that mind, body, spirit aspect of us.
That's excellent. So let's step back in time for a moment. I mentioned that in college I was in athletics and teaching snowboarding and water skiing and doing these activities. And yet at the same time, I was physically fit, but I had so much tension and stress and negative emotion. So I hadn't processed a lot of things from my childhood. I was upset at the world in a lot of ways. And so what was very interesting is that I was channeling my energy into physical activity and to my studies, and yet the emotional imbalance was so strong that it was actually harming some of the relationships with the people that I loved most. And so at that time was when I started yoga, and it was an invitation, first of all, to do something different, something very out of my norm, moving the body in all of these different ways. The first time I tried it, it was way too slow. It was boring. I felt like I could take a nap, and I'd rather do a million other things faster. And so it wasn't until a friend took me to her studio that I found a more athletic style that was more fast paced, a little more challenging, that lended to the strength I already had, but then offered me an opportunity to say, okay, well, we can build some flexibility, and we can step back and use a very uncomfortable position that you have to stay in. You can't just chase the ball down the field and run. You can't get out of it. You're going to stay. And when you stay, then you can look at what's going on at a deeper level. What's going on in the mind? What emotional state is present? And maybe there are some elements of the past I haven't looked at. And so instead of just judging them and wanting to run from them, I could look at them with a more neutral, through a neutral lens. And that was a really big awareness for me to say, I can use my body as a tool to bring more harmony overall with the body, with the mind, and with that spiritual element. And I think of the spirituality as, let's just call it this bigger element of ourselves. I think of the hand. I'm gonna tangent for just a second. We have the physical self, the intellectual, it's our creativity and how we think and what we're interested in. We have our emotional self, how we're processing the sensations from our environment, that mood that we have, and if that stays over time, does it become our personality? Our We have our social selves, we're social beings, and then we have our spiritual self, that broader self. Call it your values, it could be your spiritual nature beyond the physicality, but that reaches out and underlies every other element of who we are. And so I think when we start to take a step back and we're able to see beyond the moment, beyond the identities we have in, in our body, in a moment in time emotionally. Yes, we have these ideas, and that's going to extend beyond this moment. And so, and the relationships we have change too. So I'm going to go back: body, mind, and spirit. So this idea that the value in creating that harmony means we can show up. We have this coherence. We're in that optimal state. Our heart regulation is beautiful. We have more neural activity in the brain. Our body can be more relaxed. The parasympathetic nervous system is underway as we're moving through these conversations and these different aspects of our life. So if we can create this harmony and we can use some tools to say, I have this ability to navigate my body on purpose. I recognize that these emotions are giving me information about learning something about myself. I can start to change something about the way I'm approaching life. And maybe it's a way to step back and go, maybe I want to do something different entirely. So the emotions as a teacher, we don't have to run from them or be, again, victim to them. We can learn from them. And then when they're cohesive and all together, we can see them as a whole, we can start to appreciate, I think, the depth of who we are, and again, have less stress and more harmony and more creativity and more fun as we start to bring those into, I say alignment, but I think of it also just like an orchestra. If one instrument's out of tune, it's a really uncomfortable listen. You want the instruments to be well orchestrated, well played, so that the experience overall is more enjoyable. And so I think when we start to cultivate those different elements of ourselves, we create that within ourselves and can thrive.
There's a couple things you said in there that I want to kind of get on to, dig into a little bit more, uh, kind of separately. But I'll begin with, you had talked about, being an athlete, competing and all, but you were also carrying stress with you, and you had things that you had to do, you know, unpack in your own life. Sometimes I use a metaphor of of, again, kids carry backpacks around all the time, but they have two of them. One of them is all the expectations, all the pressures, all the thoughts and things that are going on, and sometimes worked with middle school students for years, they might be carrying that leftover lunch they haven't eaten for like, 2 weeks, and it begins to smell. But we do the same thing, right? And we know that exercise helps people, helps their emotionality, right? Exercise is really important in curbing anxiety, depression, and all. But there are a large number of athletes who still get lots of exercise, but they're still carrying that on. Um, and that begins to get tied in with the other word that you said that I want to kind of get into is identity. So I would love to have you kind of talk a little bit more about those because to me, the identity and the beliefs about who we are and our thinking processes, the emotions we have stored in our memory, the labels that we've accepted, these are all specifically mindset related things that exercise can help us cope with those. But if we don't deal with them directly, then at some point they can manifest itself in lots of different ways. And that's one of the things I've seen with athletes. When they begin to struggle is it's those things, it's those labels, it's the thinking patterns that we kind of need to address along with the things they can do in their body to help that. So I know once again I got long-winded there, but if you want to kind of unpack that a little bit, that would be great.
Okay, the first thing that came to mind as you were talking about that, as a recent book that came out by Ethan Kross, and he does research in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They talked about resilience as this ability to know when we want to dive in and process those emotions and when it's good to avoid them, right? It's this balance of, yes, I'm going to take the time and energy to remove some of that baggage, those expectations, through belief change, through, again, a different set of tools to say, okay, I'm recognizing these negative emotions. They're not serving me. They're now infiltrating areas they're not supposed to be in. But when you're out moving and playing, that's not the time to do that. The movement can help. Focusing on something else, shifting your attention to a very specific task related element in your sport can help. And so, this idea of building knowledge, this flexibility of when I'm going to choose to focus on, say, the emotional element and finding my way to, I always think of like that backpack that you mentioned. It doesn't have that stinky lunch in it, too, but it has rocks. It's heavy. You want to start taking out those rocks. And so, if there's a way where you can set time aside on a semi regular basis, I think it's helpful as clearing out the system to just let it go. And again, we have tools to start doing that, but then also using the attention we have to avoid the emotional upset at the moment, because maybe now's not the time. I have a game to play, I need to switch gears. And so resilience in the sense of building that flexibility of knowing how to address emotions and then when maybe avoidance, which can get a taboo label, sometimes that's how we survive and how we get through the experience in the moment, and then we can revisit that later. So that's my first part of your answer. What do you think?
No, that very valid. Sometimes those out of nowhere, right? Those thoughts will come in like, oh, deal with this right now. It's like, no, 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 this is not the time. And if you haven't trained yourself to be present or to be able to control some of those, you might then get caught up in that emotion that came out of nowhere. Like, why am I thinking about this now? And it's important to be able to, to be able to say, no, this isn't the time. I'll have to, I can deal with that later. Um, but many of us don't really know how to do that, right?
Yes.
We don't have the tools, and there's so many good tools for doing that. But yeah, no, I agree completely with the way that brain does work on that.
I think
Uh,
what's interesting, as you mentioned, another tool I would say in training is that pause in a deliberate way. You used it with your students to give them the opportunity to breathe. Meditation and mindfulness training is such a great way to step back and be in the present. And when we develop, say, a practice that's, again, that's off the court. This is, I feel like there's always the long term, that in your toolbox you have the immediate tool. If there's a fire, you have a fire extinguisher, you put out the fire. If there's a long term approach and there's no emergency, there are those practices we can start to incorporate that build the foundation. So maybe the response to that fire, it's not as stressful. You can still grab the fire extinguisher, but you don't have the panic maybe in the moment. And so meditation and mindfulness training being maybe one of those longer term tools, not in the moment in the sport, but off the court, off the field, to say, okay, I'm going to start to pay attention to the moment of the mind. It's going to wander. That's okay. Let it do its thing. Come back. And the ability to come back, it's that meta awareness again of saying, okay, I'm an athlete. I'm a daughter. I'm a son. I'm a teammate. I'm a student. I'm a teacher in a lot of ways. And so we can start to step back from the identities we get so caught up in. And I think once we start to build that broader perspective, we can see how those identities fit into the whole of who we want to be. Like you said, knowing where we're going and why, having that intentionality. But then also coming back to say, these identities can serve me, but they don't completely define me. And so it allows us to, I think, appreciate our wholeness and the various aspects of ourselves so that when situations change, and they inevitably do, we aren't destroyed. We aren't so cut down that you just completely lose your sense of self. It's like the wrecking ball of life can come and maybe all four walls of your structure disappear, but that foundational element is there as you start to build in some of those tools of, say, mindfulness and presence and knowing who you are and that bigger picture of who you are. Those routines you talked about in the morning and the evening, as you start to cultivate those over time, the challenges, they still show up, but you can handle them maybe in a more graceful and poised way.
Totally. You know, mindfulness, meditation, prayer, those are words that sometimes um, get used interchangeably, um, and that, powerfully important practices, I think, all of them. And um, for me personally, and this is, I'm going to kind of lead this into the question for you too, is those were the things, because I had begun developing those in my life, part of my rituals. And when I lost my wife and to cancer, those were the things that helped me grieve, they helped me process, they helped me even today. Like, there'll be those moments where out of nowhere will be a good, positive memory, makes me smile, and then the realization that, oh, she's not there anymore, come in. And then, so you go on that little roller coaster emotions, but it's that ability to recognize the emotion, experience it, understand that it's important to experience it, but then shift gears and not get stuck wallowing in it. Um, and that took building the habits, took the training. It's still something I still work on, but it's incredibly important. And just kind of want to ask you with what you went through, and it sounded like my wife was diagnosed with cancer. She hadn't been feeling well. Uh, Went to the doctor in April, got the official diagnosis in June. She died in July. So it was a relatively short stretch of time. Sound like that maybe you were experiencing something a little bit longer with your husband. So can you talk about how mindfulness, meditation, the exercise, all those kinds of things we've been talking about helped you with that whole process and grieving and all that comes with that?
Yes, and it's so interesting because the way we experience these moments with loved ones is so different. And And yet
Yeah.
the body responds in really similar ways. And so it's very interesting. Steve was became very ill in 2021, late November. We had a couple doctor's appointments. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. Within a month, he was at the hospital, and we didn't think he'd make it out 3 days later. He did, almost 40 pounds lighter, maybe 30, 35 pounds lighter. And it changed everything instantly. It was, let's shift our priorities. What matters most? Simplify your life until you're back into control, and say, okay, if you have a time limited contract, which we know we all have, but yours is more immediate, what do we want to do? And so part of that process that elevated both of us in that time frame, that lifted our moods, was having a joint project. So in the mornings when Steve felt well, we would sit in the nook and we would audio record conversations. He would tell me stories about his life, many of which became the book Miracle on the Mountainside. There were books that we had wanted to write in the future, but now knowing we weren't sure how long that was going to be together, let's put those in audio form. And then if he departs sooner than later, then I can work on those after the fact. And so having that project was a way to give him purpose in his final days, and then also to give me a creative outlet because I love to write. I love to think about how words are going to come together and stories are going to illuminate possibilities. So that was a way that lifted both of us up in that time, because there were about 2.5, no, 2 years, just over 2 years we had. So that was one thing, but that was, say, an hour of our day. Much of the day was in hospital visits and doctor's appointments and him just not feeling well. So I put things on hold in my business to become the full time caregiver. And what I thought as normal was anything but. So I had to learn to ask for a lot more help. I had to delegate tasks. I had to ask for help cleaning. I had to shift relationships with my friends and family and say, hey, please keep me in the loop. Send me pictures. It helps brighten my days, but just know that I might not be able to respond in the same way. So feeling that support and love without necessarily having to talk about the struggle at the time and the stress of not knowing if Steve would even make it through the night, that was helpful for me. And then also letting go of this idea of what movement should look like. Wouldn't it be so nice to take an hour to do a yoga practice or a half an hour to breathe and meditate? But when you're the caregiver, you don't know when someone's going to need you. You don't know when you're going to be right there at their side. And so many times I just had to take snippets of what was, say, normal and appreciate 5 minutes of breathing. Maybe it was breathing while we were waiting in the doctor's office. Maybe it was up in the middle of the night and I couldn't go back to sleep, even though he was uncomfortable next to me. I could pause and I could step away and I could breathe, or I could sneak in 30 minutes of yoga at a time. So really just modifying the practices that did still help, but just changing the shape of them to what the time period called for. Those were things that helped a lot.
Yeah. You kind of in that answer, it didn't say it directly, but it's the ability to be flexible in ourselves. I got a background in neurolinguistic programming. One of the kind of fundamental beliefs of that is this idea of the law of requisite variety. That the person, the principle, the idea that has the greatest flexibility will achieve the greatest results. And again, I think that's something that's trainable. Doesn't always come easy. Sometimes when we're thrown into the fire, so to speak, we learn pretty quickly because we have to. But that ability to recognize that I need to take care of myself, but yet my heart, my mind, everything else is on the person I love, and how to make sure you are still trying to take care of yourself at the same time. It can be a challenge. I actually think part of what triggered everything with my wife was there's a whole lot. She was also a teacher. She taught in the district she grew up in. It was like a second family, and there was things going on just before COVID that she didn't like just it was creating high stress, and she cared deeply and also had this belief, like you don't whine, you don't complain. So she kept it inside. She was keeping more inside than I think I realized until it was too late. And that's kind of one of the messages that I want to get through to people too is you got to have a way to not keep it inside. You got to be aware that you are, and then find the outlets through yoga, exercise. And one of the first signs to me in hindsight that she was beginning to um, carry too much in it was she used to be an avid runner. I mean, she was like a highly competitive runner for most of her life. Changed a little bit when we had kids and all, but she had gotten back into running. She and I would go running together after work. And then she began to get too tired to do that. So she wouldn't meet as often. And in hindsight, now it's like, oh, you're too tired because you're keeping too much in and all that. So, anyways, I'm getting a little long-winded, but part of that goes back to what we were talking about earlier is self-awareness, being able to develop that so that you know that, wait, I need to take care of myself. I need to make sure I find ways to eat properly, exercise, breathe, get outside. That was something else we haven't talked about. But since your husband's passing, what are some of those lessons that you learned from all that that you really want to bring to people? Because that, for me, is part of what I just got long-winded on. How about with you? What are some of those life lessons from that experience that you would want to share with people?
The first comes to mind is that ability to give ourselves the grace to experience those imbalanced times. I think there is this idea that we can manage all of these different emotions and manage the thoughts and have this sense of control. And sometimes the control is stepping back into those micro moments and saying, wow, my nervous system is on high alert a lot of the time. I have some tools to start to bring the parasympathetic sympathetic back online, but then maybe something stressful happens again. And so recognizing that there are periods of life that are more intense and we can do the best we can in those periods to find that sense of balance. And then also, what I learned is I had a really great tool set. I had to refine the tools I had even more. We haven't even talked about the mind and the conscious and the subconscious and starting to recognize, are there beliefs in that subconscious that aren't even serving me, that are holding me back? That we can save that for another conversation. But this idea that understanding the depth of who we are and going into these moments and giving ourselves permission to do it well and do it not well, to forgive ourselves when we really messed up and wish we could have done something different. But now we have the ability to say, okay, well, this is now, what did I learn? What can I do better moving forward? And to say that even though I had all the tools and I knew structure would be good for me once Steve was gone, I still took a year and tried the pinball approach of figuring things out and having a sense of freedom because I could do something I wanted at any moment, and that initially was very satisfying until I realized, no, this doesn't really satisfy the true purpose I have, which is having meaningful connections with others, giving them these resources that have helped me, enjoying, like you said, being out in nature, appreciating the beauty of the earth. It is a perfect demonstration of the harmony of the change. There are barren seasons. We have the Dixie Fire around the corner where there's 1 million acres that have burned. I don't drive by and condemn the fire. It's just a different landscape now. And so having the ability to step out in nature and see that it's still thriving, it's doing well. You watch the new greenery coming up on the trees already here in the spring. we can step back and maybe look at ourselves and our lives and our situations from that broader vantage point. So, getting out in nature was helpful, giving myself permission to do things well and not do things well. And then also finding the structure that worked for me. I didn't have the bandwidth or even the clarity of what that structure looked like year one. But once I figured out I want to use golf, it incorporates all of the elements of who I am. It's a tangible, time sensitive, very measurable sequence for 18 holes. And then if I play 100 golf courses, then I know when I've started, where I am at in the process, and then I know when I complete that goal. And along the journey, I was able to start trusting people again, because once you lose somebody very close to you, we can go into a very fear closed off space. As much of a people person as I am, and again, the tools I have, I still needed to figure out, okay, what does that look like now coming back into the world without Steve? And so meeting new people, being in nature, having a very physical activity that also incorporated the mind and how my emotions showed up in the experience to play well, that was helpful. And those are a couple different lessons that I think helped me start to navigate the transition. And those structural elements, I think, are beneficial, like any kind of sport or play or activity. Even Tai Chi is something that's measurable in that time sequence to say, okay, I know I can control how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling the best I can. And maybe the trigger of the emotion set me off, but now I'm aware that I can control the trajectory of how that plays out and maybe start to shift how I'm showing up in the moment. So in those periods where grief is present or loss or change and there are so many variables that are uncertain, those elements of structure can really be beneficial.
Like that. Just kind of noticing we're getting near the end, so I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the book, the Miracle on the Mountainside, and what that's kind of about a little bit, but also some of the work that you are now doing. So if you want to take a few minutes and kind of talk about those things, that would be the perfect time.
Well, Miracle on the Mountainside, I would like to say, is a tribute to Steve. He had an extraordinarily interesting life. Before I met him, you talk about stuffing emotions. He was stressed out, maxed out. His wake up call was sliding on shale on his motorcycle, trying to jump the guardrail. Bike stayed. He went over a cliff, had a near death experience while he was down there. He thought he was going to die. He was ready to go, but he had a miracle rescue and was able to come back and live again through 28 reconstructive surgeries, 3 years in a hospital bed, and three more to learn how to walk. And those 6 years of really rebuilding your physicality and learning that I can't rely on somebody else to fix me. I've got to be part of the process. So moving from victim to empowered was part of how he started to heal. And he studied NLP in great detail as well, and starting to discover how my mind and emotions dictate and determine how I move forward. And he wasn't getting well for a lot of the time in the hospital, and how he really became an instrumental collaborative component in wanting to live again, not just be in my body again, but live. And that took on a whole I guess a whole new picture. It was entirely different. And so through the book, it's all short stories, snippets from his childhood to the accident, to some of those healing experiences, to how he shifted to teaching what he knew, which was how to manage pain, how to start understanding our emotions. A lot of what we're talking about here, that changed his life. And so all of the principles are timeless of what he experienced and wanted to share in his workshops. And so you get some really entertaining stories, but also a perspective on somebody's life and how they implemented that. I think that's just a doorway to possibility. So that's one.
No, those stories are so important. Those are the kinds of stories that young people in particular, all of us need to, but I talk about trying to have young people experience all that, because early in the life, the more those stories of possibility, no matter what hand was dealt you, there's still, it's how you respond that matters the most. So I love the fact that you've pulled that and getting that book out.
And I appreciated Steve's life because he had one way of doing it. We all have our own desires and
Yeah.
interests and approaches. And I knew I didn't want to go over a cliff to figure out how to live on purpose, how to manage my emotions and change my beliefs so that they served me. I thought I'd like an easier approach. I'm not saying life is easy, but we don't all have to go through trauma. He had abuse. He had a lot of really intense situations in his life, and he learned from them. And I believe that we have this ability to learn from the stress and the challenges, whether it is as mild as discomfort we're experiencing to full on trauma. This ability to build our awareness and connect with people and understand our mind and how it works, those are all available to us. And we have the moment here, the invitation, the opportunity at any moment to start to change our perspective. And then we can step through that door. We don't have to wait for a crisis or something bad to happen. And I think that's also part of the lesson, because life can be really wonderful. So why not start to tap into the empowerment we have at any given moment, and then use it in the best way possible. So that's what I do with my business. Most of my clients, we have things that are going wrong at times, but we're focused on how do we take some of these basic skill sets and fine tune them so that I have better performance on the golf course, or I have more clients in my business, or I serve my clients better in my yoga business. We can start to take the understanding and build on it.
It's, it's all really good stuff. I know we could probably keep going. You said a few more things like, wouldn't mind delving into that, but sake of time and all, your business, if you want, is there a website that people could look you up if they want?
Yes, swagtail.com is my home base. And if you go to swagtail.com/ podcast bonus, there's a 20-minute training on how to start building some better attention. There's a PDF on how to use 3 basic tips to overcome fear when transition arises. And then I also do some book club giveaways. But if that's something that your listeners are interested in, it's a way to start fine tuning attention as well. But swagtail.com is where you'll find it all.
Fantastic, and I'll make sure that's in the description and all, so people can just click on that link and go. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for taking the time out and joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chuck, and thank you, listener, for joining us and staying tuned, because Chuck has a wealth of information and his podcast is amazing. And I think that we can start to build these tools over time so we're ready for the unexpected things that happen in life.
Thank you. Well, I hope that all of you get as much out of these conversations that I have as I do. As always, the intent is to try to, pull those little nuggets of information from everybody's different experiences and walk of life, and their journey, their story. Within that, there's so much wisdom that we can take, and maybe from one person you take this little bit, and from another you take this little bit of information. But it's really important for you to kind of take those and process that, learn from that, and figure out how you can apply that in your own life. This is really partly explains why my son Billy and I have started the Champions Mindset Mentorship Program, because a mentorship's a little bit different, longer term than just a coaching experience. And with that mentorship, we take this relationship, there's a whole lot that we offer through all my courses and trainings that we guide you through with weekly meetings, as well as the courses that you do off on the side. And it's over the time that you spend with us, and the amount of information and training and questions and all the things that go into that, it really creates a shift in your mindset that is so much deeper than anything else that we can give. It's not just about setting the frame, and I use the metaphor often of excavating the ground before you build, right? So much of what I've done in the past is that idea of clearing out so you can build something new. This is not just that. This is now building that champion of a mindset. So I would strongly encourage parents to check out the championsmindsetmentorship.com, the championsmindsetmentorship.com. This is not for everybody, but for those who want to go on this journey, one promise I can make is that you will have our full support. We will be doing what we need to do to guide you in this journey. So, once again, until the next time, go out and live life to its fullest.